Sound.
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 Sound. Sound.
Found in sound.
It's a sound familiar to any Nanaimo resident. On a foggy day, a chorus of ship whistles signaling to each other. I've always thought it was the foghorn, which was operated by the Coast Guard and located at Entrance Island, just outside the Departure Bay Harbor. However, although the lighthouse remains, the foghorn there was decommissioned in the early 2000s. The foghorn now resides on display at the Gabriola Museum. So what is the main source of the fog calls? Turns out, they are the quintessential sounds of the harbor city, the whistles from the BC Ferries fleet. BC Ferries kindly invited myself and one of the island's biggest ferry fans on board to discuss all things whistle.
My name is Scott Arkell. I'm a freelance musician. I'm born and raised in Nanaimo, British Columbia, and I am also a fourth-generation Nanaimoite. So as a child, I basically grew up around the ferries. Both my parents worked for BC Ferries. Both my parents met on BC Ferries. And when we were younger, my parents would work opposite shifts, so I would always come down to the terminal with one of my parents to be handed off to the other. A lot of my childhood memories were at Departure Bay, in the old snack bar there, watching the ferries come in and leave and hearing the sounds of the whistles and just seeing the whole operation from a sort of behind-the-scenes look. As a musician, I find myself having a deep connection with the whistles. The whistles are, for all intents and purposes, very musical. And as a musician, it resonates with me. Certainly, there's different types of whistles that sound different tones, and in combinations of tones can sound different chords, whether they're major, which is a happy tone or a happy sound, a minor, which is more sad, or also even like a diminished chord, which sounds more tense. Those are all musical feelings, and certainly those chords help to convey those feelings as well. So today we're on board the Queen of Cowichan, which is a C-class vessel built in 1976. This particular vessel is unique in the fact that one of the two whistle sets, specifically the one on the number 1 end, has been tuned to a D-flat major chord. It actually begins as a D-flat minor chord, and that E natural gradually moves up a half step to F to actually make a D-flat major chord. If the Queen of Cowichan is leaving Horseshoe Bay, you'll hear the number 1 end whistle, which is that whistle that sounds the D-flat minor to D-flat major. Or if you're in the Departure Bay area, usually when the ship is about to arrive, you'll hear that echoing all throughout central Nanaimo. So on the Queen of Cowichan here, this is a C-class vessel, so it's a double-ended vessel. So there's one wheelhouse at one end and another wheelhouse at the other. Both wheelhouses have their own separate whistle sets, and both of them are tuned differently. So the current BC Ferries fleet has a wide variety of different whistles from actually different manufacturers as well. The Queen of Cowichan here, as well as the other C-class, have whistles made by Airchime, which is a company that, of course, was first founded in Nanaimo. These particular whistles trace back to the 1950s, and in fact these whistles are still made under a different company today. But different whistles throughout the fleet also produce different sounds. So some of them, of course, are going to produce other chords, and there's other vessels as well that just have a single whistle, so it'll just be a single note. But throughout the fleet, whether it's small, medium, or a large vessel, you'll find different whistles on all different ships. So some of my earliest memories of the ferry whistles, outside of course, being at the terminal with my parents, was during my piano lessons. I had my piano lessons in Sherwood Forest, just up from Departure Bay. We'd every once in a while be interrupted by a ferry whistle. It would just happen out of the blue, and we'd always have to stop the lesson, and we'd note it out in the piano, whether it was a C minor chord coming from the Queen of Oat Bay or Queen of Surrey at the time, or whether it was an E major chord coming from the Queen of New Westminster, which of course Route 30 was based out of Departure Bay at the time. And sometimes it actually would even time out right to a particular song that we're playing that chord would actually fit. So it was adding more bass. But yeah, it was an appreciated interruption.
Many people are inspired by the BC Ferries multi-chime whistles, but are not sure about when and why the whistles are sounded. We talked to someone who could answer those questions and more.
My name is Chris Cornwell. I'm a chief officer with BC Ferries. I work on board the vessels here in Nanaimo. Work on board a total of 6 vessels at any given time. Most of them are sister ships, so it makes it easy that they're all kind of similar in some sort of way or fashion. And this is my 15th year with BC Ferries. I started as a deckhand, been working my way up through the ranks, hoping to become a captain one day soon here. Started my career on Salt Spring Island, working on some of the smaller ferries, and then have been working my way around the fleet a little bit. Spent a bit of time in Swartz Bay, Prince Rupert, and now finally Nanaimo, where I've been for the last 3 years. Yeah, so we have a variety of classes in our fleet. So our biggest class of ferries is the Spirit class ferries. There's 2 of those. They operate entirely on the Victoria to Tawasin route. We call that Route 1 in the system here. The next biggest class of vessel is the coastal class vessels. They rotate around a little bit. They can be found on that Swartz Bay to Tawasin run as well, Duke Point to Tawasin, and periodically Departure Bay to Horseshoe Bay. The next class down from that is the C class, which we see a lot of here in Nanaimo. There's 5 of those vessels in total: Queen of Cowichan, Coquitlam, Alberni, Surrey, and Oak Bay. They were all built between 1976 and 1981. Our oldest ship in the fleet is the Queen of New Westminster, built in 1964. She was built in Victoria at the time, and she's seen a lot of upgrades over the years. It's grown quite a bit in size. It's a marvel of local engineering, where it's been cut in half, made longer. That was cut vertically in half, made longer, and then it was cut horizontally and raised 10 years after that, and it's still in service today. And then we have smaller vessels that range anywhere up to from 125 cars all the way down to as little as, I believe, like 18 cars or something like that. A little bit of variety for everywhere on the coast. A ship is always equipped with a whistle. We try not to ever call it a horn, per se. The horn or foghorn term is reserved specifically for lighthouses or shore-based stations specifically. So that's how, for terminology's sake, that's the difference. So a ship will always have a whistle. A shore-based station will have a foghorn. Some of our older ships were built in the 60s and 70s, and they might have a different model of whistle on board. And so different characteristics seem to naturally develop with those as time goes on. It also relates to the size of the vessel. So different requirements are there for a larger vessel between 75 meters to 200 meters, and then anything less than 75 meters will have basically like a smaller or higher pitch whistle on board.
The whistles on board can be sounded using a pull lever or a button, or be pre-programmed to sound at timed intervals, and must meet specific standards for sound intensity, frequency, and audible range, as outlined in the international regulations for preventing collisions at sea. The size of a vessel determines the minimum required audible range and sound intensity. Larger vessels require louder and lower toned whistles.
With a triple tone whistle that we have on our ferries, there's kind of a real benefit there. It actually, a triple tone whistle exceeds the requirements in the sense that it has 3 different frequencies being sounded. So it has a lower frequency building all the way up to a higher frequency. The higher frequency is handy for alerting vessels in close proximity, and the lowest frequency whistle is handy for alerting vessels further away.
Ship whistles use specific blasts to convey warnings or information during navigation, including when entering or exiting turns, nearing obstructed areas, or when a vessel is operating in restricted visibility.
In the fog, as per the international regulations for preventing collisions at sea, We're required to sound the whistle in conditions of restricted visibility. Basically, when the visibility is 1 mile or less, we sound the whistle every 2 minutes. And it's on a programmed timer that we have on board our bridge. There, it's just a start timer, and it has to sound one prolonged blast, we call it, which by definition is 4 to 6 seconds long every 2 minutes. That has to be sounded. So one prolonged blast when we're making way. And then if we suddenly have to stop, and if we're just stationary in the water, it's 2 prolonged blasts every 2 minutes. So it depends with the freighter. So if a freighter is making way, underway, in conditions of restricted visibility, they would sound their whistle every 2 minutes, just like the ferry does. If they're at anchor, that's a different story. They're not actually going anywhere. They have a much less noisy option to use in that case. So they use a gong and a bell. So a bell would be in the forward part of the vessel, and a gong is at the stern of the vessel. And so a very distinct sound between ends of the ship, basically. So any vessel greater than 100 meters in length has to have both a bell in the forward part and a gong in the stern area. So basically all they have to do is ring the bell rapidly for 5 seconds on the bow, and then somebody would be on the stern ringing the gong rapidly for 5 seconds as well. And they do that every 2 minutes. That would be the old school, is actually being there. More modern vessels, they would have an automated version of that. So you save the whistle for an emergency situation. So even if a ship is at anchor, we still have a bridge team on board, usually a watchkeeper and possibly a lookout. They're observing the radars and just constantly having a 360-degree watch around the vessel. If they detect another vessel approaching their ship and it doesn't look like they're deviating course, they sound a specific sound signal, and it's Morse Romeo, or R, the letter R. And that actually means you're running into danger. So that's one short blast of 1 second, followed by one prolonged blast, followed by one short blast again. So basically 3 blasts on the whistle to get their attention that, hey, you're running into danger. You need to take action and deviate course. So we have a whole fleet of a new class of vessels coming to the ferries. There's no names or class name officially. We're just calling it the new major vessels. They're going to be double-ended vessels as well. It remains to be determined if they're going to be a triple tone whistle like we've seen on our legacy vessels. So I'm hoping we put triple tone whistles on there, but the specs are still being developed as we speak for all of those smaller details. Our coastal class ferries were built with the triple tone whistles that were the same model as our V-class vessels that were built in the 60s. So hopefully that tradition carries on, because there's kind of a distinguished traditional sound to a BC ferry, I think, in our community here. You sort of pick up on that in the media every now and then. If they start a news article or something like that, usually it's one of our ferries sounding the whistle, and it's a very distinct 3-tone chord, so to speak, that you always recognize it as being a ferry versus a cargo vessel. It's kind of, pleasant, or, it reminds you of home, I guess you could say, or at least for anybody that lives on an island, it reminds them of home.
So what is the origin of these multi-chimed whistles and horns? Would you believe they were developed right here in Nanaimo? We asked a local resident and historian to tell us about the artistic engineer who tested his inventions at his Nanaimo Lakes whistle farm.
Hello, my name is Daryl O's. Longtime Nanaimoite, practically all of my adult life, but it goes deeper than that. Both my maternal and paternal grandparents ended up here in the 1890s, and they ranged between Ladysmith and Great Central Lake in the Alberni Valley. So I have some sort of undercurrents or affinity of the area and the land, from the highways to the backwoods, that I sort of inherited. And so I have a real sense of place here. And the Whistle Farm is one of those things that I knew about since, 1967, when the CBC did a little 10-minute documentary on site with Robert Swanson. And then my mother added that, he's a friend of your grandfather's. He used to come out to Great Central Lake and visit him. But a little bit of supposition there. I think he was probably there professionally speaking, because he was doing railway inspections, and my grandfather had boats on Great Centrals for towing and for taxiing people around, and he likely would be taxiing Robert Swanson to all the various logging operations on Great Central Lake to do his inspections of the steam boilers and equipments and railways.
Robert E. Swanson was an engineer, inventor, poet, and musician who was born in England in 1905, and his family moved to Nanaimo in 1907, where Robert grew up on a farm in East Wellington, which is in central Nanaimo.
And Swanson was mesmerized by the steam trains in the area, working the mines and going down to the harbor to drop off the coal. And when he was 12, he got his first job cleaning and repairing boilers at the Jinglepot coal mines during the summer holidays. Then in his teens, he operated and repaired steam donkeys in the woods, as well as steam-powered sawmill boilers on various locations. Sawmills were scattered hither and yon back in that time because of transportation, so they were situated closer to the woods and the logging operations. And it was while working at a sawmill as a fourth-class engineer, he earned that by only 17, that he got his first opportunity to build a steam whistle for a sawmill near Nanaimo Lakes. And during the rest of the 30s, Swanson bounced around logging camps and sawmills to build up enough steam time to upgrade his steam ticket to first class. And by the end of the decade, he was chief engineer at the new Chemainus sawmill, which was state-of-the-art and had the capacity and technology to mill the huge logs that were available at the time. And it was at the Chemainus mill that Swanson designed and built the largest steam whistle in Canada. On May 10th, 1940, this giant whistle blew for the first of decades in starting and stopping signals. That blew until 1983 when that mill closed.
And it's the Chemainus Mill on Vancouver Island, the largest steam whistle in Canada.
That very steam whistle still stands tall but silent at the Chemainus Museum. Although, if you ask at the desk, they'll graciously play you the recording that will echo throughout the building. Chemainus is known as the City of Murals, where Robert Swanson and his steam whistle are commemorated in the Waiting for the Whistle mural, just down the street from the museum.
And while employed at the Chemainus Mill, Swanson studied engineering, earning his degree from the University of BC in 1942. The mature student with years of hands-on experience behind him didn't attend a class, but he lectured to other engineering students at the university. These lectures were mainly on the advantages of diesel power over steam, though his subsequent writings and logging poetry show that he was fonder of the fading era of steam trains and whistles.
Robert's interest in steam power also extended to items he collected, including the #1 mine whistle that originated in the 1880s, which was donated to the city of Nanaimo and now resides in the Nanaimo Museum's coal mine exhibit. The Nanaimo Museum also has an information plaque dedicated to Robert E. Swanson's work. When he was the provincial chief railway inspector, Robert purchased the No. 19 steam locomotive that was built in 1889 and used for hauling coal in Nanaimo, Union Bay, Cumberland, and South Wellington. The locomotive was retired in 1952 when the No. 10 South Wellington mine closed, which is when Robert bought the locomotive and donated it to the city of Nanaimo, where it has been preserved for viewing at Piper Park ever since.
And post-war modernization ushered in diesel power, sending steam, which was the workhorse of the Industrial Revolution, out to pasture. One of the turning points in Robert's life was as steam faded away, as well as the whistle, diesel came in, and it did not have the sound. It had the sound of a truck or a bus. It just had a single horn. There were incidents owing to this confusion. One was where the train hit a logging truck at a crossing in Westholme, which is that area north of Duncan and south of Chemainus. The confusion at the time was that the driver said, "I just thought it was another truck." And so Swanson got the idea. He was a trained musician, actually more of a musicologist, I would think, and that he knew the science and the theory of music. And he determined that a steam whistle had a C-sharp diminished chord, I believe. So that took 5 notes. And he developed this compressed air horn by going out in the woods near Nanaimo Lakes, at Nanaimo Lakes, with a portable compressor and experimenting with different length of horns, trumpets, all mathematically speaking, in order to get this steam whistle sound, in order to replicate it with compressed air and a horn.
There are challenges to replicating a steam whistle using compressed air. A steam whistle operates as a flute, with high temperature, high humidity steam getting blown in one blast through a tuned chamber. A horn operates like a trombone, with compressed air vibrating a diaphragm that pushes sound out of the bell of the horn. Robert Swanson's models use multiple horns to produce a musical chord that acoustically simulates the sound of the steam whistle. Their tone is produced by a multi-layered, thin-ply metallic diaphragm and a heavy-duty clapper disc. Pitch is controlled by the bell length. And Robert's models can be operated at various air pressures, which control volume but do not alter the tone produced.
And so he toiled away at this in the Nanaimo Valley, River Valley, of course, to stay away from, so he'd be completely silent, because whatever these sounds echoing back down into Nanaimo would cause as far as traffic, railroad crossings, and later with the ship horns, there'd be a nightmare for marine navigation and traffic management. So that is the reason that he situated his operations way out past Nanaimo's second lake.
The whistle farm was in a logged clearing where a 1914 steam donkey had been left by a forestry company. Swanson had constructed walls and a roof onto the wood sleigh of the structure and added diesel compressors and electric generators and brought in air compressors and tanks.
So after successfully creating this 5-chime diesel air horn, Swanson got the patent for it in 1949. He was, of course, the first to create this multi-chime. That's what it's called when you've got extra notes playing rather than a single horn or even a single whistle. He named his company Air Chime. It was centered in Burnaby, but what this story is about is that he did all his development and testing out in the Nanaimo Lakes area. Air Chime became and still is the dominant name in railroad air horns in North America. On the sea, the Canadian, British, and U.S. Navies and Coast Guards agents acoustically signal with Swanson Air Chime horns, as well as foghorns. He developed foghorns. Many of those are being decommissioned now because of radar and GPS, sonar. Incidentally, the Gabriola Museum displays foghorns, air chime foghorns, from Entrance Island at their museum. And our ferry terminals, almost the entire BC ferry fleet voices its arrival and departures with air chime horns.
And not only are Robert Swanson's horns heard on vehicles, trains, and ships around the world. A decommissioned BC Ferries multi-chime whistle is blasted every time a goal is scored during a Canucks home game. The Victoria Royals, a team in the Western Hockey League, also use a BC Ferries whistle as their goal horn.
We also have O Canada horns in downtown Vancouver, a centennial project where they were originally mounted in 1967 on the BC Hydro building. And when the BC Hydro building got converted to condominiums, they transferred those horns over to the Canada Place, or specifically Pan Place Hotel at Canada Place. And so it continues the tradition of blowing O Canada at noon every day. And he used 10 horns to represent each province. Also in '67, Swanson was commissioned to design an O Canada horn for the Centennial train. The Centennial train was a museum train that crossed Canada, and Swanson designed the train horn to go, "O Canada." And what is even lesser known is that we also had a convoy of semi-trucks that were also towing portable museums with them, and he developed truck horns for those that also said, "Oh, Canada." It's so remarkable that this little ramshackle place out in the woods is such a world influence. Then and now, it's still continuing. I sort of imprinted by this train whistle sound, honestly, because in the family home where I grew up, our front yard was only barely 100 feet away from the train tracks, I'd say. There's nothing between us but the train tracks. And this is in Port Alberni, and the trains were coming frequently to and from the mills. And we were also between two crossings. So the whistle was just a part of my life. The trains coming through, the crossing guards clanging, and the whistles blowing. And further than that, in 1967, CBC did a 10-minute on-site interview with Robert Swanson at the whistle farm. And I saw that and I thought, oh, that is amazing. And growing up in Port Alberni, I always felt a sense of isolation, like only had a 3-channel black and white view of the outside world. But we got to Nanaimo often. Nanaimo was one city I was also familiar with because we'd come here to visit my grandparents. And I thought, wow, something that's in my sphere of activity is actually on TV. So I never forgot the whistle farm since then. So the whistle farm is, it was a mecca, it was a shrine or something I always wanted to visit. And part of my sphere of activity is to ride motorcycles on a road, off-road, but always with a destination in mind or an objective or trying to make it educational. I'm sure I annoy my friends with this to no degree, but every time we ride our bikes, I have to make a field trip out of it. I have to say, we're going here, we're going to talk about this, or I'm going to show you this, or we're going to look for that. And then I give a little speech upon it, and they suffer through it. I knew an old logger that worked out in Nanaimo Lakes. He could hear Swanson testing his horns and whistles on site there. And he even stopped in to visit him one time on the way home. It's off the main line. You have to know the little side route to get to the whistle farm. And so I took George Gall, he's the old logger I was just talking about. I took him out there to help me find it. We located it, and at that time it was still quite extant and standing. It was quite a mesmerizing experience for me to come around the corner and find it there after seeing it in the CBC docs. To have finally actually been there and realizing I'm at ground zero of our oral heritage. Now the whistle farm, Robert abandoned it in about 1983, 84, after starting it in 1960.
The whistle farm was in a logged clearing where a 1914 steam donkey had been left by a forestry company. Swanson had constructed walls and a roof onto the wood sleigh of the structure and added diesel compressors and electric generators and brought in air compressors and tanks.
So finally being there, it was so remarkable, not only for me, but also for George Gall. He was, as guys of his age at that time were, they were also fond of steam because they were used to working with it. They were used to the trains. They were used to the loaders. They were used to the whistles. It was quite a experience for him to come back there and see it. Like I said, it was mostly extant. As we crawled around it, you know, it's things like nails that Robert had put in the interior to hang gaskets and hardware and nuts and bolts and connections. And it was thinking that, well, okay, he was the last guy that touched these, and he hung these on these nails. Subsequent visits, I saw it in a couple of piles of rubble. And now, in my most recent visit out there, not a shred. Everything has been removed from that site, so not a nail, not a bolt, nothing left.
So Robert Swanson's designs have proved timeless. The designs to this day have remained relatively unchanged other than some different metals and maybe some casting. But that sound, whether it's heard somewhere in Europe or in South America or, you know, on the east coast of Canada, can all be traced back to the original whistle farm in Nanaimo Lakes. And that's something that's truly, truly cool.